Hey everyone, so today we're going to be talking about ethics, and I'm going to try to make my video here, this little video lecturette, as quick as I possibly can. One, because I'm kind of losing my voice, all thanks to West Virginia fall allergy season, and two, because you'll see that there's a number of different videos that I have posted for you in this week's module that talk about ethics and our ethical obligations as counselors, professional counselors, rehabilitation counselors, and what that means for us. And you guys are going to have an entire class on ethics, of course, but this is, within the first intro to rehab counseling class, and this could be your very first introduction to the ethical codes that we have to abide by, and that you all really do need to abide by even as students at this point. So surprise, there's some ethical codes you need to know about. The ethical codes are listed in the resources. There's two main codes of ethics that you're going to be looking at in this program. One is the ACA Code of Ethics, the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. In 2014 it was updated. That's the most recent update that we have, although they're diligently working for the next revision. A lot of states, the LPC boards, will look to ACA's Code of Ethics for those standards. So if you're working with a client in the future and you're an LPC and something happens, that client has the right to go to your state board and file a complaint against you. That state's probably going to be looking at the ACA Code of Ethics and seeing if you were acting in an ethical, appropriate manner with that client. The other one is the CRCC Code of Ethics, and so as rehabilitation counselors, we have a separate code of ethics that does look a little bit different than the ACA because the population of people that you're working with is likely going to be different. When you're working with people with disabilities, some severe disabilities or significant disabilities, there's a different set of ethical codes for that purpose, and one of the major areas is kind of how we define what's an appropriate relationship with one of our clients or a past client. So what I encourage you to do, I always say encourage, I can't force your hand on this, but go through, review those codes of ethics, start to become familiar with what they say and what the standards are. The most important thing that I want to convey to you guys today is that when you're thinking about ethics, ethics are a set of moral principles. It's kind of these guidelines that professional organizations have set for us to follow. They're very gray, because if we were to write a code of ethics that talked about every potential ethical violation and the minute details that could go along with it, it would just be too much information. And so when we're thinking about our ethical responsibilities and our obligations to clients and ethical issues that can come up, oftentimes they're very complex and complicated. And so for that reason, we need to go through a decision-making process, and ACA has laid out a very nice decision-making process for us. There's all different types of decision-making processes out there. But the main takeaway is that when you're faced with an ethical dilemma or a potential ethical dilemma or boundary crossing or a dual relationship issue that comes up, you never want to think of yourself as alone on an island of a being that sole decision maker. You should always go and consult with a supervisor. You should always talk, keeping confidentiality requirements in place, of course, but you can talk with colleagues that are more experienced. You can talk, if you're in practicum and internship, with your supervisors here at WVU and on our program. There are even people that sit on those ethical boards, those ethical standards boards, that you can go to them and say, hey, I have this issue come up with a client. I don't really know how to address it. How would you advise me to address it? A lot of times we're running even some of these things by an attorney. And so if you're working for an agency, they might have a legal representative. If you're working in your own private practice, you're going to have your own attorney that you can turn to for certain issues as well. So you're never making this decision on your own independently, and you certainly should be taking some time to go through a decision-making process before figuring out what the best option is. When you're thinking about the codes of ethics themselves and when you start looking at them, and this is really important because I asked this on test questions, okay? So there are different sections of a code of ethics, right? And so there are certain principles. Those are the foundational values for ethical behavior and decision making. So there's principles of a code of ethics, and this is one part. Principles are like autonomy, veracity, fidelity, non-malfeasance, beneficence. So those are the ethical principles. Then the code itself has different sections. So the ethical principles are always laid out prior to the sections, and then these sections are where it talks about the counseling relationship and professional relationships. Now we see that codes of ethics have a certain section or specific section that talks about online communications and technology, because that's something that we now have to be dealing with, right? How can we maintain ethical behavior in an online, if we're present online, and what to do about social media. Within each section, sections are usually A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Within each section, then you find the codes, okay? And those are those specific ethical standards that we have to follow that are related to that section, okay? So if you're thinking of the structure of a code of ethics, again, very important for test question purposes here, you've got the principles, and it's always important to look at the most up-to-date and recent code of ethics, because for example, in ACA's 2014 Code of Ethics, we added veracity as a principle, okay? And so there are 6 principles under ACA's Code of Ethics. Then you have the sections. Those are the big main parts. They're topic areas, basically. And then within the sections, you have each specific code, and each of those codes relate to that specific topic area. So hopefully that helps to explain kind of the structure of a code of ethics. Depending on if you're, in a different group, like a subgroup of ACA, you might have another code of ethics that you're adhering to. It's always important to make sure that you're following all the codes of ethics that would apply to you, and making sure that you're aware of when they, again, are updated. You can find codes of ethics on, the organizational sites that these codes of ethics are coming from. So ACA's Code of Ethics is on counseling.org. CRCC's Code of Ethics is on crccertification.org. I think that's their website now. Who enforces the code? It depends. It depends on the code in question. Some codes don't have internal enforcement mechanisms. So if you're getting into like a subgroup of ACA that does have their own individual code of ethics, like multicultural counselors, I think that's a subgroup of ACA. I believe they do have their own set of or code of ethics. They might not enforce it on their own. They may kick it back up to ACA to do the enforcement. CRCC does enforce their code of ethics. And what happens when you violate an ethical code, there are a number of different remedies for it. So, one is that you could kind of get a warning. You could have counseling mandated to you, meaning that you have to go and seek counseling about a situation. It could be that if the violation was so severe and so significant or impactful to somebody, then, you could have your licensure or your certification taken away or suspended. And of course, ethics and law go hand in hand, and a lot of times parallel each other, but certainly if you violated a part of a code of ethics, you may have also violated a law, and if you violate a law, then whatever the legal implications are for that are what they are. So I provided some examples of decision-making models. Again, you check them out and just be aware that those are there. That's the main thing I want to drive home today, is that there are decision-making models out there. And so with the expense of my voice, my short little 10-minute lecture here, I'm going to leave you guys to look at the other videos that I've posted that are related to ethics, and I will talk to you on the discussion boards, okay?